Okie doke. So, just a brief introduction. I've been with Millborn for a long time now, about 13 years. And so I've gotten to see a lot of things change. And obviously, in this webinar, we're going to talk about cool season grains and forages, and there are some changes. It's an older industry as far as those varieties and options go, but there are still some new things out there that are relevant to what we're talking about. I've been a forage and crop specialist, director of sales, and now my role as the egg product expert, which is really going to focus on doing a lot of things like this and helping our dealer distributor network gain knowledge to help their customers. And so that's going to be a big focus of mine. I grew up and still live in Pipestone County, Minnesota. Have a family of 5 with 4 children right now, and one foreign exchange student. So if you want to meet cool stories about an Italian 17-year-old boy, I'd be happy to share those with you. That's pretty fun experience for all of us. We have some sheep and some cows, and then our farming operation really consists of making as much feed as possible. We grow some grass seed, and then we do have just a little bit of corn and soybeans. Reed, you want to go ahead and chime in a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I've been on with Millborn for just under a year here now, but I kind of work with all of our growers here across the Midwest when it comes to producing the seed. That's kind of my expertise, I guess, here for Millborn. I live out here in central South Dakota, so cover a lot of central, western South Dakota over the years, and yeah, me and my wife live out here. So
awesome. So Reed's going to really help us out with the management of the small grains, and that's what he does as far as grower relationships on the production side of things. So when we have growers that grow a field of oats for us or a field of forage barley for us, he can walk them through that management plan. And so his knowledge in this presentation is pretty valuable. As far as Millborn goes, I mean, a lot of you guys know a lot about us, but there are some of you that are fairly new as far as working with us. But we've been around a long time now, and the years keep flying by. And so it's a company that's 36 years old. And throughout that span, we've continued to grow our geographical reach. And so, it's pretty cool to say that we've shipped into 50 states now. And we have a little bit of exporting going on right now too. But the thing that separates us apart, I guess, in our industry is that we have a very, very diverse array of products. And that's something that we're pretty proud of. We got 1,200 species of seeds on hand. And so it doesn't matter what the project is that your customers are working with, we're able to probably cover that need. Okay. Guess one more trying to get in here. Okay. So as you all know, we are in Brookings here, but as of recently, we just purchased the location that's in North Sioux City last year. And so that's going to be another point that customers can pick up at. They're going to have most all the products on hand that we carry up here in Brookings. And then, we've had that location out in Blackhawk for about 4 years now, just near Rapid City. So the other cool thing about this location in Brookings is we had a nice expansion project go on the end of last summer throughout the fall, and finished up with that at the end of the year, doubled our square foot. Building capacity, we put in some bulk bins for bringing in clean bulk material, and then we put in a blending and bagging line out of that as well. And so we're able to blend a truckload of blend and bag a truckload of seed in about 2 hours. So it's a pretty efficient little blending line, bagging line there too. So it'll be really, really good to help increase our capacity when things get really busy. Gotta admit another one. Okay. All right. So this is just a pretty good outline of what we're going to cover. We're going to get into varieties and then the management of these. We'll talk about oats and spring wheat mainly. I'm just going to slightly touch on barley as well. But Reed, do you want to go ahead and talk about just the management of that cool season grain option, the oats?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to hit on is, on all these cool seasons, you want to maximize the amount of time that the seed is in the ground. As far as the cool season time frame goes, so we're going to recommend to try to get the seed in as early as you can. Depending on the variety, and work with the rep as the best that you can. As far as seeds per acre and that type of deal. But as a general recommendation, 3 bushel an acre is pretty standard. There's kind of a wide range of, I would say, the depth goes as you push farther west and you run into maybe some more drought type conditions. You want to get that seed into the best seed to soil contact, into some moisture as possible. So it does have enough ump to get through that depth there. So as far as fertility goes, I think there's quite a few different figures that you can look at here, and this is this is coming from North Dakota State. But I would say the biggest one to highlight on is your nitrogen. 1.3 pounds per bushel that you're wanting to get as a yield goal is pretty common to go off of. I think it's coming to back off on that just a little bit if you're doing split applications, whether it's a starter plus one broadcast over and then a foliar. You can tailor that maybe down a little bit, but I would keep in mind what you had planted before, whether it's soybeans or peas. Use your soil test to make sure that if you got 30 pounds of nitrogen out there, utilize that, especially with the cost of fertilizer as well. So that's just a little bit on nitrogen. Phosphorus, potassium, I won't dig into a whole lot, but again, those are some numbers, and we'll have those at the end here for you guys as well. So
Reed, can you talk to, lodging of oats and heavily manured ground and planting oats on that? And it's been heavily manured.
Yeah. Well, Justin, you probably got a little bit more experience as far as the manure application as going east and lodging. But yes, as you get over that 1.3, units per bushel, especially on nitrogen, watch what you're putting down a little bit and make sure you're sampling and you're what type of fertilizer you're putting out, and that way your oats aren't falling over.
Perfect. Yep. No, that makes sense. I mean, that's just been the one, I don't know, the holdup from some people from wanting to plant oats again, if they've had them go down in the past and had a big problem trying to pick them back up, they're less willing to plant oats again. Do you want to talk about Hayden's?
Yeah, I guess this is probably one of my favorite here in the central part of the state, as you push west as well. If you look, this is the average yield goal trial. That's from the eastern part of the state, but they were number 2 in the 3-year average in the central location. So Pierre, Gettysburg, as you push south, the central part, they were number 2 over the last 3 years, as well as the western locations as well. Your average yield goes up. I like these a lot because they're drought tolerant. That they are a longer maturity. That it's a mid to late. They're taller than your standard Jerry's, but they've just been a pretty good product over the last few years.
Yeah, so we're going to go through 3 different varieties here, and these are the ones that we've had production on and will have for sale this year, and that's why they're highlighted here, I guess. But yeah, Hagen's, if we're in South Dakota, central South Dakota, or really light ground, they've been a really nice fit. All right, so next one up here is Dion, and Dion is a release on the University of Minnesota. It's been around for a few years now. When it first came out, it was like the best oat ever. I mean, people were seeing extremely high yields on it. I think maybe that's slided down just a little bit, but quality is still really good. And people that had, contracts with grain millers and needed to meet a quality specification, the Dion oats fit that really well and still do. They're unique in the sense that they're not a white oat like all of our other ones in our portfolio. They're actually a yellow oat. And so for having a high yielding yellow oat, that's pretty unique, I guess, because it's going to meet the quality specs. they'll put out good yield. So on good soils with good fertility, that's where we've put Dion oats. So it seems like eastern South Dakota, southwest Minnesota, these Dions have done really well. The other new one that we'll have this year that we haven't had in the past is buffalo, and this did just come out of South Dakota State. I think this one is going to be it's going to fit the market for an earlier maturing oat that stands really well. Is going to consistently put out good quality. I don't think, you know, and over the 3-year average, it hasn't yielded quite as well as like the Dion's will, but you know they've been a little bit higher than the Haydens. But I would say something that you want consistently good standability, consistently good test weight. These buffaloes are the ones to look at now. So anything to add on those, Reed?
Yeah, I was just going to say consistent. You know, it's not going to be running the number one in the pack or dead last. I would say this is going to be more of a consistent oat as the years go on.
Yeah. And the Rushmore is one that we're gonna speed up that maturity even more. And so there's areas that we'll touch that want to double crop with something. If it's an early spring, you know, when we get into southern Iowa, Missouri, people are looking for a quick cereal to combine before they come back with another cash crop, and these Rushmores can do that. There used to be an oat called the Shelby 427, which is a really fast, quick maturing oat, and this is probably that same maturity but a little bit better yielding. You know, we can push something into the 90s still for yield potential with these Rushmores. Quality looks to be pretty good on them too, but once again, it's you know, your placement is going to be where you want a quick maturing oat to harvest real fast in the early summer. All right, so this budget, you know, obviously every budget you got to take with a grain of salt and put in your values here. Last year, the oats budgets were really fun because the values at this time of the year were in the upper 5s, low 6s even. And so that looked pretty lucrative to grow oats. That market's quieted down just a little bit now. You know, we're probably into the 4s at most places, some high 3s. I mean, I think that probably just shows you that it's still not a bad option, depending on what we can get for yield. And obviously probably the best thing about raising a small grain right now is the value of its straw. You know, if you can pull off a 1.5 to 2 ton worth of straw and look at some cover crop options behind that, then that value per acre starts to go up if we've got another double cropping option behind it. All right, so spring wheat management. Reed, you want to go through some of this with wheat and the do's and don'ts of that?
Yeah, again, kind of the same, plant early. You know, your seeds per pound, depending on your variety, just making sure that you know, there are certain ones that you're going to want to increase that over 1 million, 1.2, and push a little bit further. That's just as a general point. But again, I think somebody else mentioned that in the comments here, but, you know, really soil sampling at where your soil, or, you know, where that seed is going to get out of the ground, that 2-inch depth. Just making sure that, you know, you've got a little bit of nitrogen getting it going. This is, as we talk about fertility here in a minute, we're going to be stressing a little bit more on the nitrogen side of things, because it's going to be less user efficient on nitrogen versus your old crop. And so again, here's just some numbers on different things and whatnot. I'm gonna mention again, I guess, you know, spring wheat following a grass crop, you're probably going to be applying a little bit more nitrogen to it. 2.5 pounds per your yield goal minus your legume credit or your soil test as well, is going to get you kind of to where you want as far as yield goes. I would say, like the other one, your 2.5 times, I think you can back that off as you split applicate. There's been enough studies out there that shown you can get away with trying to cut that back with fertilizer prices a little bit, if if you're running a starter, if you're going to be broadcasting or applying some in season and maybe a full year towards heading time as well. So again, every condition is different, but yes.
All right, so the oat varieties that we have, the first one up here is it's LCS trigger, developed by Limmergrain cereal seeds. This one, kind of like those Hayden oats that we talked about. Seems like Central South Dakota and West on lighter soils and drier climates. This is a pretty good option, but it is really going to push yield. It's one of the higher yielding ones on the SDC trials over the last 2 years. It's averaged really well. So the other good thing about this one is its disease resistance. It's excellent. Okay, so if we're fighting pressure with fungal disease and pathogens, Forages is probably the right option to look at there as well.
And one thing I'll kind of point out, and it's not so specific to trigger here, but if you look at the trials at SDSU over the last 3 years, you're gonna see a lot of late maturity spring wheats in the top 5, and that's statistically just been shown that your later season you tend to be towards the top of the pack, and it's really been shown here. Dr. Kleinjum has reiterated that quite a bit, but there's something to be aware of as you're picking varieties.
The other one, and we're really probably just going to promote 2 varieties that we'll have for spring wheat. Minnesota Torgi, obviously it's a Minnesota release, but a fairly new one. And so, being a developmental variety coming out of Minnesota, it seems like it's done well on better soils. It kind of fits with the state. So more rainfall than what our Central South Dakota, Nebraska locations have. This one does need some moisture. It's going to do better on higher quality soils with fertility, but it's one that's really going to push protein, especially if you're pushing nitrogen fertilizer to it. And so under high quality spec contracts, this is one to look at that way as well. Maturity is going to be pretty middle of the range. It's going to be a little bit shorter than most, but that also means it's probably going to stand really well. So good standability, average maturity, excellent quality, are kind of the characteristics of this Torgi wheat. Anything to add on that one, Reed?
No, that's an Eastern one for you.
Yep, it is. Definitely more Eastern. All right, so that kind of closes up with the grains. I put barley on that opening slide, but to be completely honest with you, there's so little barley that's utilized for grain production that it's probably not worth talking about, except mention the fact that if you get a customer that wants to grow barley for grain, we do have robust barley seed available for that. Okay, and those management practices really aren't a whole lot different. We'll follow those same management practices as what we do on spring wheat. So if we flip the script and use some of these for forages versus grains, it kind of changes how we would manage those. And it definitely changes what we would look at for variety. One of the things that, this started last year and it's still, out there as far as circumstances are with prices of DDGs, prices of alfalfa hay, prices of soybean meal, all those are our high protein options in rations. And so because protein is expensive, a lot of livestock producers are looking at options, ways to grow their own protein versus buying it. Okay, so this graph really just shows you what those options are from a relative forage quality value, okay, which a lot of times does revert back to protein and digestibility, increase your forage quality. Okay, and we'll talk individually on these ones which are higher protein, but I think that's a pretty relevant topic right now with where we're at with the cost of protein. Okay, when we talk oats, there's grain oats, there's forage oats, and there's dual purpose oats. Really the only true forage oats are ones that don't have high grain yields. Okay, so they get a bit more expensive to produce from a production standpoint for grain, but for forage they're excellent. Okay, they're going to have a wider bladed leaf. which means their leaf to stem ratio is higher, which means their quality is higher. If you stood these side by side next to a field of Jerry oats, they're going to look like a whole different species, honestly. Stem is thicker, girthier, everything about them is just more robust. And so yields are substantially higher on forage oats versus a grain oat. The everleafs are developed out west by a company called Progene. And so those genetics, are pretty conducive to those environments. And when I say west, I mean like Oregon, west. So they have a lot more rainfall out there. And so these everleafs, if we're going to plant them here in the Midwest and the Upper Great Plains, they do like better soils. They do like more moisture. And if we put enough nitrogen fertilizer to them, they do really, really well. With that said, because they're so big and the biomass is so high, it's a better idea to plan on chopping them versus trying to hay them. They're going to take a long time to dry down and say the everleafs specifically. Okay. If you know that you want to take them for hay versus chopping them, we've created this blend called dual threat. And we take the Goliath oats, which is a dual purpose forage grain oat that was developed here at SDSU, and we mix those with everleaf. And the idea here is the Goliaths are going to be about 2 weeks earlier maturing than the everleafs. And so they'll start to develop a little bit of grain, right? Like we're trying to time the maturity of the everleafs to be in the milk stage. And when the everleafs are in the milk stage, the Goliaths are usually mid to late dough. So we've got a little bit more starch development on the grain, but we've got the quality, digestibility, and the higher protein content of the everleaf. So we're trying to make this nice little ration of oatmeal by combining the two. Okay. I think it also hedges your bet with environmental conditions. The Goliaths are much more drought tolerant, require less rainfall than what the everleafs do as well. Okay, so we can push that blend by having the everleafs in there for yield and quality, but probably be a bit more conservative. What is realistic for moisture by having the Goliaths in there as well. Okay, so kind of a nice little option that way. All right, if we're moving into drier environments, drier soils, or if we believe that we're going to have less rainfall for this spring, I would look at spring triticale. Okay, triticales are a cross between wheat and rye, and so they're really, really tough. Everything about them is just durable. They're gonna, but when they developed triticales, they specifically bred them to be a forage and not a grain. They haven't focused on grain yield specifically, just forage yield. Right? They're fairly tall. They're going to be taller than what wheat would be, getting similar heights to what rye is. And we're pretty excited about using a lot of the tri-cal varieties this year. And the two that we've had good luck with and continue to promote this year are Flex 719 and Gunner. Both of these are facultative, right? Which means that you can plant them in the winter or in the spring, and they're going to act the same. Right? We have a lot of Flex 719 in the ground right now, actually. Planted in the fall, actually, and then we're still going to be able to plant it in the spring. It'll do the same thing. Gunner is a beardless one, where Flex 719 is onletted. Onletted means it's going to have really short beards, or that Gunner is completely beardless. So if you're making dry hay off of the triticale, you don't want any issues with lump jaw or palatability, I would plant Gunner because it's completely beardless. If you're looking for a little bit cheaper option that has been pretty consistent over the years, that Pronghorn is one to look at. Really, really hardy, drought tolerant, and it's going to come off quicker. So if it's one that we want to double crop with maybe a cane or a millet behind it, and you want to have a quick hay crop, Pronghorn might fit that scenario. Anything to add there, Reed?
Yeah, I got a lot of experience with both Flex and Gunner there. Gunner is just going to be more biomass, I feel like. It's going to be a little bit better quality, where your Flex can get some more height on it. But I feel like the grain yield, if you're going to take it a little bit later, Flex 19 is they're both longer maturity. And so just keep both of those in mind. I did really like the performance of both of those here last year. So
Yeah. So we had a question in the chat from Tom, asking if triticale is a good cover crop or nurse crop with alfalfa. And that's an awesome question. And anytime we're using any cereal as a nurse crop, we just need to remember to not overdo it with the seeding rate. So triticale is a good option with alfalfa because the quality is usually slightly better than oats. But if we're going to do it, we're going to seed more like a bushel per acre versus 2 bushels per acre. Just so we're not, you know, having too thick of a stand that crowds out the alfalfa. If we're using oats, you know, I wouldn't go over a bushel and a half. I'll just stick around a bushel. So most of the time, rule of thumb, use about half of a full seeding rate of a cereal grade as a nurse crop with alfalfa. Okay, or perennial grass for them. All right, forage barley. I like forage barley. It's a pretty cool plant. I think the seed heads are unique. Forage barley is completely beardless. It's not going to have an on it at all. And forage barley is probably one of the nicest quality cereal hay options because it's going to have higher crude protein levels. Barley in general, the entire plant has more protein than both oats or triticale or spring wheat. And if you're in pockets where, you know, we've had too much water, or you've got these wet, mucky areas where salts are starting to creep in, and we have saline pockets in fields, barley is the most tolerant species to high salty areas, okay? So this makes for a good nurse crop in an area where we're gonna go in with perennial wheat grasses, you know, to alleviate those issues of saline getting worse. Or it works really good if you know that I cannot grow soybeans any longer on those saline seeps. I have to have something different. I would look at forage barley because the barley will tolerate the salts in the ground or the high alkalinity, and it will continue to grow through there. If you're looking at a very, very high yielding silage option, this isn't your answer, okay? Out of all the three, oats or triticale or forage barley will be the lowest yielding option, but it'll make nice quality hay that's fairly easy to put up because it's a little bit, you know, less of a windrow to cure around or dry down. All right, so all of those are options to also blend with peas. And like I started out talking about, if your goal is to create a higher protein feed option on your farm, then I would definitely add peas with it. Most all of our blends go out at the rate of 60% peas, 40% grain option. And we're seeing that at around 100 to 120 pounds per acre. We do custom blends of these. You know, we've done variations of rates. We've made them just opposite of that with 40% peas and 60% grain. But what we have on the floor comes standard is a 60-40 pea oat or pea grain mix, okay? This too can be used as a nurse crop, and we've done that. We just back that rate down to around 40 or 50 pounds per acre. Most of the time people are chopping this. Right, the peas themselves, they stay a little waxier. They're a little harder to cure out and make dry hay out of, but it can be done in drier environments when we get the right one. But if you're going to do that, maybe you have a backup plan, you know, to make baleage out of it. If it's not going to dry down all the way, you can wrap them up and you know, stick them in a tube and let them ferment that way, versus just having that field completely spoil or caramelize as hay. So know that it can be done, but have a plan B if that's what you're planning on doing. Okay, but yield is great on these two. You're never going to sacrifice yield by adding peas. You're just going to add protein and maintain yield versus doing a straight grain option too.
And I'll highlight one thing here, Justin. We've talked about the varieties when it comes to oats, barley, triticale, and that type of stuff. The peas that you're going to see in a mix are technically forage peas, so they're not a yellow or green where they're semi-leafless. This is a true forage pea. They're indeterminate when it comes to their flowering times. And so they actually kind of hold on and I feel like that's why they work so well with a grass as well. They feed the nitrogen, but they can turn off. And when the water turns off, they turn off, quit flowering, quit putting pods on, and then all of a sudden you get a rain, they'll flower back up again and continue to put on pods, which I like in a mix a lot better, especially if you're taking it for hay. You're just going to maximize the amount of biomass that you're going to be being produced. So just a tidbit on the peas there.
Yeah, and as far as varietal selection goes with the grains of what we have in there, it does change a little bit depending on where we're at with inventory. But for the oats, we're looking at Legates or Mortons in with the peas, and they are going to be late maturing oat that times pretty well with the maturity of the peas. Okay. If you're looking at that field and you're contemplating on when to harvest it, usually those oats or the grains are starting to, they're probably in the dough stage at the same time you're getting pod formation of the peas. And that honestly, that's ideal state to take them in. If the peas get much past that stage, we're going to see more shattering of both the grain and the peas. And so we're trying to hold on to that grain, maintain a little bit of starch, but not lose any of that either as it starts to dry down in the winter. I put this up here just as fun because as I was putting this together, I realized how many photos we have in our file that people send us. So the PO, P-Trip, whatever it is, they must be the funnest to take pictures in as well. So these are pretty cool pictures. Like we can get some really tall grains in there with the peas. They're really pretty when they start to flower. People ask if they can eat them. So yes, they are edible as well. They taste just like a garden pea. And I kind of talked about this, but the other thing that this does is it adds diversity into our rotation. It's a legumina mix. So from a fertility standpoint, we probably lower the need for nitrogen on that. It doesn't mean that we don't need any, but we have a legume that is, actually nodulating out in the field for us and maintaining some of that nitrogen. We don't have that entire removal rate as what we would if it was a straight cereal. The thing that this does do is it doesn't give us a herbicide option. If you plant peas and oats or peas and triticale, you cannot spray it. All right. And most of the time, honestly, it's not really that big of an issue. Because if we've got a good stand, we're crowding out and suppressing weeds through competition, and we're going to take it off for a forage. And so we're not really ever seeing those weeds fully mature and become a bigger issue since we're taking it off the field too. All right. The last thing to talk about is on these cool season options for forages is OptiGraze. And we've had this mix around for about a decade now, and it's pretty cool if you're looking for something to plant early in the spring and rotate through for a grazing mix. And the market dynamics determine whether this is a viable practice or not. Maybe we're there right now if you're really bullish cattle and you think bred heifers are going to be worth even more again next winter. This might be an option for you if you got some marginal acres that are harder to farm or they tie into perennial pasture. You look at this mix because you're gonna rotate through this and take advantage of the regrowth of the species that are in this blend. Okay, Italian ryegrass it's a biannual species that tillers really well and continues to regrow throughout that entire season. So if you're up for rotational grazing and using polywire and rotating through a field, this is the blend you'd want to use. It's going to be really good quality. And so if you've got those spare acres and you want to hold on to replacement heifers and develop them out on forage instead of a lot, this is a pretty cool option to look at. Okay. Everything in this mix usually winter kills except for that ryegrass. If we get enough snow cover, that one's going to come back that next spring. But most of the time it does die up here. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, since you hopped on this webinar, I think it's pertinent to visit about rye. There's a ton of rye out there. sitting under snow in fields that's going to have to be managed next spring. Okay. And people always ask, how do I kill it if I'm not going to use it as a forage? Well, first and foremost, it does die with Roundup as long as it's warm enough. Okay. The plant is actively growing. We've got, air temperatures in the mid 50s. It'll take in the chemical and die just fine. The bigger it gets, the tougher it is to kill. That's no different than any other plant. So we want to get on it earlier than later before it goes into the reproductive stage. There's more folks just planting green into it, and that's certainly an option. If you want to save a pass of Roundup, you can plant your soybeans into that growing rye and then come back with Roundup and your pre and get it that way, and that's just fine. And the last option up there is if you're using a roller crimper, which it's not as popular up here as it is in the east. People are using a roller crimper to kill it that way. If that's the case, you want to make sure that that plant is actually jointed. Right? It won't have done that until you start to see a flag leaf develop on the plant. So after we've killed it, or maybe if you want to plant green into it, the one thing to remember is that down pressure is absolutely critical on those fields. Because they will be harder. Though that stewing rye, it tends to dry out the top of the fields, which is great when it's really, really wet. And it's not so great when it's dry. Okay, so make sure you've got plenty of down pressure. Your planter is set up right. If you're going into tall rye that hasn't been cut off, you're going to have to change your planter setup too. Okay. Your row cleaners are going to have to be pulled or raised up because they are going to wind up with that rye. So it's going to take a little bit extra management for sure. And the last point to make on it is that it's a growing grass. All right. So agronomically, ahead of corn, it's not the best fit. Rye has an allelopathic effect against other species that it doesn't allow the germination of things like ragweed and pigweed. Kochia to some extent as well. But because that allelopathic effect, it is going to slow down the growth of corn because number one, it's pulling nitrogen and holding nitrogen, and it also has capacity within the plant material itself. I don't like it ahead of alfalfa either. It really affects that growth, but it does work well against soybeans, and soybeans aren't affected by the allelopathy of it. All right, so that kind of concludes what we wanted to hit on. As I mentioned at the start of this, we've got 3 more of these scheduled out here and planned for you. And we'll probably add some more cover crop ones as well as that season approaches. So if you find these valuable, please hop in on them. I know that we're going to be able to offer those CCA credits on a couple of these as well. And so if you need those, we'll have that available as well. So jot those down and certainly tune back in. Give us feedback too. We'd be happy to tweak these and do them however best educates you and best helps you. That's our contact information up there. I guess we'd be happy to answer any email questions that you have later on. But certainly, if you've got questions now, you can stick them in the chat or unmute yourself and we'll help you. Reed, do you have anything else to add there on any of those varieties or management?
I think the only thing that you mentioned there that you talked about that you wanted to bring up was just the nurse crop there on the oats, varieties. I think all the varieties that we have talked on today, there are a few more that we either do have in stock or will have around. I guess just stay in contact with your representative, and I guess it can't hurt to ask to see if we got around with. Probably a good chance it probably do.
Good point. All right. Well, I appreciate you hopping in once again, and thank you very much. And if there's something you want to go back on and look, we'll have this recorded and sent down and saved on our channel as well. So appreciate you once again. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.